At this point in the series, I should have, and wanted to share one of the most beautiful and unforgettable experiences anyone can have, seeing elephants for the very first time. Instead, because that day turned out to be completely different from what I had imagined, I didn't record a single video or take any photographs, except for one showing a barbed wire fence. One of my greatest dreams has always been to observe, and perhaps photograph, wild animals in their natural environment. I consider their presence on this planet to be a privilege for us human beings. Driven by that dream, I booked an organized elephant tour just outside Chiang Mai, through Klook. According to the sanctuary's description, the elephants could only be observed from a distance, in their natural habitat, without any interaction with humans. Among the countless elephant sanctuaries in the area, I deliberately chose this one because it appeared to be the most ethical according to its reviews. The sanctuary's own website simply states that these elephants had previously been used in construction work and the logging industry. It was there that I discovered my understanding of the word ethical was very different from that of the people writing those reviews. After leaving Chiang Mai in a van, we stopped at a gas station only a few minutes into the journey and remained there for more than an hour. Only later did I realize that the delay was simply to allow the group ahead of us to finish their visit. Once we finally arrived, we walked downhill from the road toward a wooden shelter where our guide introduced the day's activities. Along the way, I noticed an enormous area of burned forest on one side of the road and cultivated fields on the other. I asked the guide why. He answered bluntly, "We need space to grow food for the elephants." What did you expect me to say? That was the first moment I began to suspect something wasn't right. At the shelter, we were instructed to put on pink shirts so that we could immerse ourselves in Karen culture, the hill tribe traditionally associated with caring for elephants in this region. Only later would I discover that the shirts actually served another purpose. They allowed the elephants to distinguish visitors from the mahouts, or, as they preferred to call themselves, the elephants' caretakers. The guide then began his presentation, listing information that sounded as though it had been copied directly from Wikipedia, explaining the differences between Asian and African elephants. Then he shifted to another topic. He told us that tourists have no idea what life is really like for wild elephants, and that without human assistance they simply couldn't survive. He urged us to be realistic and reminded us that, without domestication, there would no longer be any elephants left in Thailand. He finished with one of the most sophisticated pieces of psychological manipulation I have ever witnessed. He asked us, "Are you ready to be happy? If you're not ready to be happy, you won't be happy even when you see the elephants. You have to choose to be happy. So, are you ready to be happy?" The audience was completely captivated. Australians, Israelis, Americans, Peruvians, French, Indians, Singaporeans, and a few other Europeans besides myself responded enthusiastically. The guide stood up, pointed dramatically toward the valley, and almost as if on cue, the elephants appeared. 5 female elephants of different ages slowly emerged, including a mother and her calf, escorted into an enclosure by several caretakers. As we walked down toward the valley, we stopped beside a large tree stump that had been turned into a chopping block for cutting sugarcane. Another guide explained that sugarcane was part of the elephants' diet and that, in order to help care for them, we would prepare it ourselves. He handed me a machete. I picked up a stalk of sugarcane and began chopping it into pieces. I remember thinking, we'll probably leave it somewhere and then watch the elephants come and eat. But the guide immediately corrected my assumption with a slogan he would repeat over and over again for the next 15 minutes. "The more food, the more friends." We loaded the chopped sugarcane into large crates and carried them to the elephants, who were waiting beside their enclosure, or, as the sanctuary preferred to call it, the feeding station. Before approaching them, we washed our hands in a makeshift sink. The guide then showed us exactly how to hold each piece of sugarcane so the elephants wouldn't accidentally pull us toward them. And then I witnessed one of the most humiliating scenes of my life. Dozens of people, overwhelmed by an almost uncontrollable excitement, began twisting themselves into awkward poses, desperately trying to capture the perfect photograph with the elephants. Everyone seemed obsessed with getting the perfect selfie. Some people were so impatient that they couldn't even wait until later. They immediately started live streaming on social media. One after another, they grabbed a piece of sugarcane, approached an elephant, turned toward their phones, smiled for the camera, and took picture after picture while feeding her. I stood there watching the scene unfold. It was a display of human vanity and superficiality that contrasted painfully with what I was experiencing. I was still completely overwhelmed simply by standing in front of these magnificent animals. They were enormous, yet astonishingly gentle. They moved with remarkable calm, and their eyes looked so incredibly similar to ours that I felt as though they were looking straight through me, as if they could somehow read who I was. Meeting them should have been a moment of pure wonder. Instead, it was heartbreaking. 2 of the elephants appeared noticeably overweight, and all 5 eagerly accepted every piece of sugarcane offered to them. It didn't look like hunger. It looked like addiction. An overwhelming sense of anguish came over me. Instinctively, I turned away from the crowd, leaned against a wooden fence, and stared silently across the valley. The guide carrying the machete noticed me. He walked over and offered me several pieces of sugarcane. I politely declined. Without saying a word, he gave a barely noticeable signal to the other guide. When the feeding session ended, it was time for the forest walk with the elephants. Using jets of water, hand signals, and voice commands, the caretakers directed the elephants toward a wooded hillside. We followed them. The trail was steep, muddy, and slippery. Not everyone could keep up. Whenever the group fell behind, the mahouts simply shouted, and the elephants immediately stopped and waited. According to the sanctuary's own rules, visitors were never supposed to come within 5 meters of the elephants. That was one of the sanctuary's main ethical claims. In reality, however, the trail had clearly been designed so that visitors would repeatedly find themselves only inches away from the animals. The elephants were so accustomed to this daily routine that some visitors even reached out to touch them. None of the elephants reacted. It was obvious they had experienced this countless times before. The number of photographs and selfies being taken was impossible to count. The atmosphere among the tourists was euphoric. Several people asked me to take pictures of them. At first, I agreed once. After that, I politely refused every request. One young woman kindly offered to take some photographs of me as a souvenir. I thanked her, but told her I had absolutely no intention of preserving this moment in a photograph. Instead, I tried to distance myself from the group. With every passing minute, my discomfort became harder to contain. Then Mr. J, the same guide who had delivered the speech about happiness, approached me. He smiled and asked whether I was enjoying the experience. I answered politely, "No." He turned to the mahouts and said something in Thai. Then he looked back at me. "What were you expecting?" he asked once again. I explained that I opposed exploiting animals for profit, and that I believed the sanctuary's advertising was fundamentally misleading. He challenged me to prove it. Unfortunately, there was no phone signal, so I couldn't show him the description of the tour I had booked. Instead, I asked him a series of questions. Where did these elephants really come from? Why weren't they free? And why call this place a sanctuary if it was, in reality, little more than an open-air zoo? His answer surprised me. He explained that, originally, all elephants in Thailand belonged to the king. Later, they had been given to members of the Karen community to help with logging and heavy transportation. When those jobs disappeared, the owners of this land reinvented themselves. This tourism business, he admitted, was what replaced them. I then asked why the elephants couldn't simply be released into the wild. He replied that their immune systems were now too weak, and that they would die if they were set free. He openly admitted that they had become completely dependent on humans. Finally, I asked about their daily routine. He explained that the very tour we were taking was repeated 5 or 6 times every single day. After answering my questions, he picked up his phone and made a call. His tone immediately became serious. When he finished, he gathered the group and made an announcement. The elephants will continue toward the waterfall from this side of the hill. Today, however, we'll take a different route. We'll go back down and reach the waterfall from the opposite side. In other words, the itinerary had suddenly changed. We turned around and walked away from the elephants. As we descended the hill, I overheard several comments about me from other visitors. None of them were particularly flattering. We eventually reached the final stop. There, we were told to change into our swimsuits. It was time to bathe with the elephants. The very same elephants we had supposedly been forbidden to touch. The same elephants we had been told to stay at least 5 meters away from. The same elephants we had supposedly come here only to observe, without any interaction. Everyone else hurried to get changed and rushed toward the waterfall, eager for yet another selfie. One that would probably earn thousands of likes on Instagram or TikTok, and perhaps a little envy from friends back home. That was my breaking point. I walked over to Mr. J and asked if I could end my visit there. To his credit, he immediately arranged for a pickup truck to take me back. While we waited, with everyone else already at the waterfall, I witnessed something I was never meant to see. One of the female elephants suddenly came running down the hill toward the waterfall. She was trumpeting loudly, her tail held stiff and straight, visibly terrified. Close behind her was an angry mahout, shouting, waving his arms, and chasing after her. It had started raining. The trail had become dangerously slippery. For a moment, I thought she was going to fall. Thankfully, she didn't. Mr. J looked at me. He didn't say a word. He simply watched my face, trying to understand what I was thinking. Then the mahout noticed that I was watching. Instantly, his attitude changed. He composed himself, only to remember a second later that he was still chasing a frightened elephant, and continued running after her. We walked toward the pickup truck. Once we reached the top of the hill, Mr. J handed me his phone. On the other end of the line was a woman who introduced herself as the sanctuary's coordinator. She told me she simply wanted to make sure everything was all right. It turned into a very long conversation. Our voices became increasingly tense. The discussion continued on WhatsApp over the following 2 days. In the end, she informed me that I was not entitled to a refund. For what would become the first of many times, I replied that I had never asked for one, nor did I want one. I climbed into a van that was already full of visitors from the previous tour and returned to Chiang Mai. Back at my hotel, I was overwhelmed by guilt. Not only had I witnessed something deeply upsetting, but I had also paid for it. I had financially contributed to the exploitation of these animals. The first thing I tried to do was write a review on Klook, hoping to warn other travelers about what I had seen. But the sanctuary had already acted. While I was still on the van, they had processed a full refund, effectively canceling my booking. As a result, I permanently lost the ability to leave a review, both on Klook and on the sanctuary's own website. I did everything I could to reverse the situation. Nothing worked. I even attempted to post my experience on TripAdvisor. Ironically, my review was rejected because, according to them, I had not personally experienced the attraction. The only action that seemed to make any difference was writing directly to animal welfare organizations and to genuine elephant sanctuaries across Thailand, explaining everything I had witnessed. The responses I received reflected exactly the values I believe in. More importantly, they reminded me of something that deserves to be said. Not every tourist is willing to accept the exploitation of animals. Some of us refuse to look away when we witness injustice. As the wonderful volunteers at Save Elephant Foundation explained to me, the situation for elephants in Thailand has already changed dramatically compared to the past. Things change slowly, but surely, and much of that progress exists because visitors themselves are becoming more informed, more compassionate, and less willing to support exploitation. What should have been one of the most beautiful experiences of my life became one of the most painful, but I left with an awareness I didn't have before. And because of that, I would like to ask one thing of anyone planning to visit this extraordinary country. Please, don't go to see the elephants. Please don't make the same mistake I did. Every ticket purchased helps keep this industry alive. And as long as the money keeps flowing, the cycle of exploitation will never truly end. Today, my skin bears the image of an old elephant. It will remain with me for the rest of my life. A permanent reminder that we owe a debt to nature. A debt we can never fully repay.